It's as far away from the metropolitan rush of Los Angeles and New York as it sounds. Corpus Christi has always struggled for distinction in a wide, vast state that also boasts major urban centers like Houston, Dallas-Fort Worth, San Antonio, and in recent decades, Austin. In the late 1960s, the city was home to a bustling teen beat rock scene that included the Bad Seeds, as well as two bands that I sang for, the Zachary Thax and the Liberty Bell. But by the late 1970s, the Corpus Christi rock scene was down to a handful of blues-based rock combos whose sets leaned heavily on covers. In the clubs, top 40, country, and Tejano prevailed. It was bad enough that a young hotshot guitarist named Jim Heath decided to pack his bags after graduating from Ray High and move on to Austin. Years later, he found a certain measure of fame in Dallas, but that's another story. This story is about the kids who decided to make it happen for themselves.
Oh my God!
How did you guys discover punk rock in a place like Corpus Christi?
Well, a buddy of mine, David Reese, we were high school friends, and one day he brought home an album, and he said, I don't know how good this is or how good it's going to be, but anyway, put it on, and it was Never Mind the Bucks. And yeah, we were instantly, this is good stuff.
I guess I kind of discovered it like a lot of small town kids of my generation through news reports of the Sex Pistols when they first came to America in that ill-fated tour in January of '78.
Well, and you had mentioned the Zips.
The Zips, yes. Corpus's first ever punk band. I never got to see them, but man, their legend preceded them. I can remember the very one ad that brought them together.
One day we were in Clausen's Music, and there was an ad, punk band, basically punk band seeks bass player. So we called them up, and it was these two guys that were living in Kingsville at the time. Bob Wolf, who was played synthesizer, and Rich Smith, who was drummer. We set up in the front room of Bob's parents' house, and I think we showed them a couple songs, and they showed us a couple songs, and I think we each knew a couple of Ramones songs and some Pistols tunes, and that was it.
Next thing I know, I'm hearing the reports about this band called the Zips that got themselves booked into a Battle of the Bands thing that C101 had set up. And there's all these heavy metal bands on the bill. Here comes the Zips, wearing Judas Priest and Led Zeppelin t-shirts, ripped to hell, shredded, put back together with safety pins. And I don't know what their material was like or anything, but I know they apparently threw the gravy train dog food into the audience and, you know, basically shouted, "Fuck Priest, fuck this, fuck that." And reportedly they had to be escorted out of the premises by police escort.
Someone had the idea to get a big bag of dried dog food in order to be heaving it out into because there was always stuff coming up to that, so we figured, you know, why not? Bob picks up the rest of this bag of dog food and throws it out into the crowd, and it literally is just gets shredded by people that are just so filled with hatred. But so anyway, we've got all our stuff, and it's time to go, and we open the back stage door to the parking lot where our van is, and the whole crowd from the theater has emptied out into the parking lot, wishing to do us harm. CCPD had created this wall of police from the door to the van, and you know, our gear went out, and then we made a run for it.
I guess it was the summer of '79. Me and a good friend of mine, Steve Lambert, had opened up a theater that's now closed down called the Oasis Theater on Leopard, right across from Braslaw's. He had built a humongous light show. We started using canisters of all types until we finally achieved the look we wanted.
Purple Mushroom was a band that everybody wanted to be, basically because there was nobody else. And of course, you know, being that, you know, it's rock, it's rebellion, you know, all that kind of stuff. It was a guy thing, you know. Sure, let's do that. And after the theater closed within a year, we had many bands there. We had Lakes Diamond, Bugs Henderson, Quake, Heyoka. If anybody remembers some of these bands. And you remember when the Coliseum was here, they would, you know, have, you know, they would host, you know, bands like Priest and so forth, and everybody was crazy, you know, hey, let's go check out these big bands, because there was nothing else.
I just really took a liking to music at a young age, and it just was the heavier the better. Went from Triumph to Ted Nugent to Judas Priest to just anything heavier I could find, you know, and then till it all exploded in like '83 with Metallica and Slayer.
I'm real bad with years. So maybe 81, I'm thinking. 80, 81. Carroll High School their Latin club used to hold a Battle of the Bands every year. They would hold it in their gym. You know, they had 2 stages on each side of the gym, and most of the bands, well, all of them really were metal bands. And there's where I got exposed to a lot of, I guess, you know, kind of Rush, Triumph, Judas Priest type of bands that play. You know, one of the bands that I can remember was Purple Mushroom, They were in that Battle of the Bands, a band called Fury, Iron Sledge, Pegasus, Tokyo Rose, just, you know, your typical bands that would do covers and originals. It was a way to see live bands when there wasn't too many bands to see, too many places to go see live bands around here at a young age.
Basically what happened after that, when the theater closed down, I kept in contact with some of these booking agencies, and we threw some shows at the Ritz Theater. Some of the biggest acts I can remember we first worked with was Def Leppard. We did Riot, Motley Crue, Blackfoot.
When Alicia Keys came out, those were called imports, and they came in plastic sleeves, and they were more expensive because it said import on there. So, crap, not only did I have to save $7 or whatever it was, but now I gotta save $13 to get that one that's supposed to be oh so special.
You know, I was just always looking for the next best, heaviest thing, the aggression, the power, and I think that's, you know, what the love of music in general is what led me to try to form my own band, which we did in late '85, early '86 with Devastation.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And so you also saw Iggy Pop in Corpus Christi. What was that like?
That was more, I could connect more with Iggy than I could with Patty, even though that was not a good period for Iggy. I think that was the Zombie Birdhouse tour. Once again, I don't know how in the hell I got into Mars that night, you know?
How old were you at that time?
17? Yeah, I don't remember a lot of people being there. In fact, Iggy and I talked about this later. As far as he knew, the only advertising the club had done was some classified ads in the Caller Times. He was wrong about that. I had flyers for it.
The music scene was basically bar bands. Yeah, so there was no, there wasn't any real music scene other than that. Just going out to clubs, dark, dank places. Well, you know how the humidity is there in Corpus, and so just be a mess. And but we went to see bands because we were into seeing bands, but they weren't terribly good.
It was Iggy's new wave phase. He wasn't exactly Iggy Stooge at that point. You would hear maybe a little bit of 1970 or something like that. We basically kind of had to go to him to play Search and Destroy or anything like that.
We had another venue that we did many shows at was Johnnyland, which became, well, that was Ford Concert, then Johnnyland, and then it became Texas Sky Park. Mr. Huerta, Joseph Huerta, went ahead and purchased that venue and decided to have all types of events, country acts, mainly rock acts, what we started with back then.
The members played, if I'm not mistaken, the Red Rockers from New Orleans did a gig there too, back when they were almost more The Clash than The Clash were at that point.
So how did it end?
How it ended was Bob decided he was going to go legit and go to school. But then a friend of ours, her name was Sheila, she somehow we got her in as lead singer. And we did kind of, I don't know, I guess if for lack of a better term, we went new wave, I guess. We played Bayfest actually with her. It was so funny because we were like, we just knew we were going to get the same old reception that we always have, but we were at Bayfest and they dug us. It was bizarre. We were stunned by the positive reaction. And I don't think we did too much after that.
A great show that I wasn't able to go to, but really regret, was Motorhead coming on the Orgasmatron tour, where they brought Cro-Mags with them as the opening act. And if I knew today if I knew then what I knew now about the Cro-Mags, I would have done any freaking thing in the world to be at that concert, because Cro-Mags were a really great band to do the crossover bit between punk hardcore and metal.
All throughout school, I was in the work program. I only went half a day, so I met a couple people by coming up to these shows in San Antonio, these underground shows in like '83 and stuff, and it was a close-knit scene back then. Everyone was just really cool and friendly, and it was all about the music.
We did primarily covers. We did covers of Maiden, Motley Crue, all the sort of like glam bands that sort of came out at that particular point. And there was a lot of metal. Maiden was one favorite in particular. We did everything with metal, particularly because one of the guitar players could actually mimic Murray. I mean, note for note. That was his deal.
So I exchanged numbers with people and stuff, and there was a promoter out of San Antonio, Omni Productions, who brought Slayer for the first time, etc. Well, in '85, he contacted me and said, hey, how would a show on one of these underground shows do in Corpus? So anyway, needless to say, he talked me into bringing Nasty Savage down to Corpus December of 1985. So, like you said, I rented the Stardust, I rented a sound system, lights, and whatever, and just lost my ass on the thing. I mean, it was just horrible. I don't even think 100 people paid to get in, and it cost me like, $3 or $4 grand.
There was a place down Air Street, and it's probably been torn down already, because it used to be called Uncle Wade's. We were the house band there. We were sort of contracted by the payment of beer.
Like I said, I went to school with Alex, the singer of Final Assault, so we were actually buddies. He would ride up to San Antonio with me. We'd skip school and come to these Merciful Fate and Slayer shows.
Doing that for a while, months and months and months, and really not getting anywhere. The discouragement started coming up. It's like, is this all there is?
So when Final Assault was taking off, I really had an interest, and I helped them finance their first demo recording at Gary Beck's studio there in Corpus, and I started throwing shows with them, and I threw a big show on Thanksgiving of '85 with, it was Final Assault and Watchtower, brought down Watchtower, and man, it was like 600 or 700 people. We were just amazed. It was like, wow, maybe there is a market for this down here if you just do it right and promote it.
But I wanted to take bits and pieces of Dio, of Halford, of Motley Crue, of Bruce Dickinson, and later on Queensryche came out, and have those people and put out my own stuff. So naturally, I started experimenting.
Assault. The thing about them is, I think that people, whether you were just a fan of music or you were an actual musician or even in a band, I think the thing about Final Assault was that people held them in this high regard, not because they were doing something different than say some of the metal bands or the rock bands that a lot of us grew up listening to, but because locally they were our first exposure to do it yourself. These guys at the time, what they were doing was they were, you know, renting their own venues to play their own shows.
Devastation formed around January, February of 1986, and like I said, it was Dave Burke left Final Assault, which really took everyone by surprise, as like they were doing good shows, opening for Metal Church and Yngwie Malmsteen at the Ritz, and had original material, and were even getting looked at maybe at that time by Azure Records, and he wanted to do something heavier and more aggressive and faster, you know, and you know, we were good friends, and he asked me, you know, well, why don't you sing for the band? And I'm like, dude, you know, I just don't know how to sing, you know. I mean, look at Alex over here, that's singing. I don't know how to do that, you know. And needless to say, he talked me into giving it a shot.
I had met Rodney Dunsmore at a couple of concerts here in town, and we kept in touch, just seeing each other at underground shows in San Antonio and here, and one day out of the blue, he just called me up and said, hey, I'm starting a thrash band. You know, I'd like to know if you'd like to be in it. And I was like, yeah, I play guitar. He's like, well, we got a guitar player named Dave Burke, and we just want to keep it one guitar player. And I said, okay, that's fine. What do you want me to do? He said, you know, we need a bass player. I said, well, I can switch over to bass. That's no problem. And that's when I first got exposed to playing live. Devastation was my first live act.
And then drummer, we found a drummer through Reynolds of Purple Mushroom. His next door neighbor was a guy named Jesse. I remember we met at my apartment off of Everhart for the first time, and Dave had like the opening riff of Massive Devastation, and Jesse was there hitting on my callus the drums, and Dave was showing Alex the bass parts, and it was just the beginning of something, you know. And it definitely at that time there wasn't anything like that going on in Corpus. I mean, it was like Final Assault, and there was nothing, just thrash, underground, heavy. And we were going to try and be the first, you know, so.
In fact, I think we had been together like 6 months, and Rodney comes in and tells us, okay, I got us our first show. We're thinking, okay, you know, a little local show, this and that, and we asked him, well, you know, what's the first show? He says, we're opening up for Anthrax and Hellstar at the Ritz, and we're just like, what the fuck, you know? I've never played in front of a crowd before, so I'm kind of like, oh shit, you know, this is the real shit. This isn't, you know, a little set-up garage gig, or this isn't a keg party, you know, this is the real shit.
Anthrax, of course, sells out, and so it was about 1,800, 2,000 people there at the Ritz, and it's our very first show ever. And for me and Alex, never even been on a stage before. Dave and Jesse had played some shows before, but for me and Alex, nothing, man. It's cold turkey, you know. So we go out, and it was just amazing, man. Packed house, great reception. We just tore it up.
Man, I remember wheeling our little half-stack amps into the Ritz Theater through the back, loading in, and as we're pushing them in, I turn and looking back, and there's like a wall of Marshall stacks. I mean, just probably like 4 columns just stacked high, camouflaged amps, all all those cabinets were Scott Ian's cabinets, and I'm just walking in with, pushing in our little equipment in and saying, what the fuck is this? Big drum riser, a huge set.
A lot of people thought we were from out of town, because I remember we were throwing our own show a few months later at the Stardust with the Watchtower, and we were passing out flyers at Metallica. Metallica was playing Memorial Coliseum, so we're in line passing out flyers, and people were receptive. Like, oh wow, Devastation's coming back, and oh, that's gonna be cool. Like, back, we live here, dude. But because of the first show with Anthrax, it kind of looked like we were a touring band already.
I'll never forget seeing Devastation and then going home, putting the Devastation cassette in and my headphones on, and just having to listen to it, flip it, because I just loved it. I just loved how they sounded and how heavy and intense they were.
When did you start hosting live original rock bands here?
Originally in 1986 when we first opened. It was shortly after that. There was a band, they won the Battle of the Bands, Aggressor they were called. And they were kind of like the first ones that Brock came in here and says, hey, we got this band, we need a place to play, and there wasn't a lot of venues open at that time, so they kind of opened up the doors for us, and after that they were just regular metal, 80s metal, and after that I ran into the guys from Devastation. They used to come here on a regular basis, like after work, whatever, on their day jobs, and they set up one of the first big national act shows that we had, and just kind of took off from there.
We financed our own album, Violent Termination. We put that out, and that should have been our first demo. We should have never done the first demo. That should have been our demo, and put that out and get feelers. But we wanted to have our own album and do everything like that. We did that. It got good distribution. It sold around 10,000 copies worldwide.
We go to this guy's house, and we actually signed a contract with Azure Records. The whole band did. We're, hey, we gave them an EP, we had our picture in the front, logo in the back, and it was a record. We can actually play this thing. We sold it at Craig's Record Factory. I'm not sure if Craig's even exists anymore. Ruben used to work at Craig's. And of course, naturally, hey, Ruben works there, hey, let's put our EP in there, and the manager said it was fine.
Brand new experience for someone like myself. To me, that was like state of the art. We were there for, I think, a full 2 weeks doing it, and it's just, you're doing things over and over. Let's do this again. I think you can hit the note. I think this and that. And to be honest with you, by the time it was over, I hated my music. I was so sick of listening to it, and I brought a copy of it home, and of course everybody's like, play it for us. So I was like, here, you listen to it.
I don't know the exact order. Maybe Azra was first, 85, 86. So Final Assault was probably first. Then we got signed to Combat, and Anchor Wat got signed to Death, which was a division of Metal Blade, and Annihilator got signed to Wild Rags.
I used to go to Record Bar, and they used to have a magazine rack with magazines that were like 2 years old, a year old. I'd still buy them, metal magazines, and I'd go through the back and look at all the ads, and I would send demo tapes to these record companies I'd never heard of. And Wild Rags picked up on our demo, and he liked it, and he decided to sign us. So we did, it was one demo we put out, and then we put out 2 EPs and a picture disc.
I got started with Final Assault because they were one of one of the bands that really started breaking ground. Of course, Annihilator, great metal band here that was kicking ass that I have a pleasure of jamming with later on in the years with Alex Dominguez in my band Kilomora. And you had Mark Arispe, who was a singer for Annihilator. He branched out and started doing bands like Yes Work.
the funny thing about Annihilator is we kind of would, we were a thrash band slash, we had hardcore parts in some of our songs, so we would draw the hardcore crowd and the metal crowd.
Sitting with hatred, fuck your face. Nation fear, are to blame. Still we will die, facing blame. That mistake, from the end. Time has come, things like that. Victims of war.
You know, which was cool at the time, but other places like New York and California, it was called crossover. You know, when you had like DRI, or you had, you know, like, you know, the Crumbsuckers, and you had all these bands that were combining metal and hardcore at the same time. You know, you'd get, you know, the best of both worlds. You know, sometimes it wasn't all the best combining, you know, the you know, both worlds together, because you had the long hairs that would stand in, you know, up front and, you know, would do their thrashing and do their headbanging and stuff, and then you had the hardcore people who would, you know, start moshing. They would start, you know, their circle pits. You know, they'd run into a long hair, turn around, punch them, then, you know, a big old free-for-all would break out, because, you know, the long hairs weren't used to seeing, you know, the hardcore or the punks doing that type of thing, you know. And then when they would try engaging in it themselves, of course, they weren't really doing it right. They were doing it to hurt people, and that's where big fights would break out and stuff. And but, you know, it's all in all, you know, everybody got along pretty well.
What was it like to be a punk rocker in Alice in 1981, 82?
It meant getting your ass kicked on almost a daily basis. It meant that you were completely alien to everything, which I think was the general punk rock experience of the time, and in some ways still is, even though it's a lot easier for kids who become part of this culture now.
Kind of started with the Evans Brothers freestyle team when I was doing that here in Corpus, and we'd always ride to Black Flag and Agent Orange during our shows.
My first exposure to punk and hardcore was through the skate ramps that people skated at. I remember some of the older kids were playing Black Flag, Dead Kennedys. I heard that a lot.
And it kind of evolved to the point where I was finishing up with the freestyle stuff, and I said I could probably get more chicks if I played music. So I started playing bass in a hardcore band called Raw Sewage, and we did a bunch of GBH covers and Exploited and things like that. And then I had a goth band called House of Usher where we did the same kind of thing, some hardcore covers and some goth covers, and we'd rent out the Elks Lodge and throw shows here.
It was probably early '85 that I was in a band with a guitarist named Brian Jackson, who played with Star Chamber. It was another metal band that was playing around in junior high, early high school years, and my brother. We called ourselves MSG, which stood for Morbid Sperm Group. But basically what we were doing is we were just doing really fast noise crap that my brother had butchered a bunch of nursery rhymes and turned those into our lyrics.
Okay, my first punk rock band actually was a garage band. Never made it really out of the garage.
We had retarded songs. I think one of them was called Fuck Libya or something like that. But, you know, it was a standard minute-and-a-half long, 30-second long song. We were very happy when A&M Radio and College Station played our song. I can remember that. We made it. We were huge.
Like I said, when I met Adam and Danny at the Motorhead show, I was actually wearing a DRI shirt. And Adam actually came up to me and said, "Do you like that band?" I was like, "Yeah, I must. I've got the shirt on." And he goes, "Well, I'm a musician." Danny said, "I'm a musician." And a friend of mine, actually Mike Trevino, that was with me, said, "Well, Dave sings." And I was like, "No, I don't." And he goes, "Yeah, you do." And they set up a date. They actually came over to the house. They set up their guitars and stuff and kicked into a Discharge song. And when I started singing it, they stopped and they said, "How the hell do you do that?"
Return of the Living Dead, I think, was the name of a movie. Came out around then, and we went there. We met this guy by the name of Tim Stiegel who was there. You know, we noticed he had like spikes in his hair and all this stuff. You know, so we hooked up with him, and he told us he lived in Kingsville, had this, zine called Noise, 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 and so we set up a party. After about a month after we met him, we had a party at Billy's house.
They had a car pulled up into the driveway so they could stage dive off of it.
People came and slam danced, and everything, and then we set up a night at Oz where there was a teen club called Oz. I don't know if you remember it.
Yeah, I do.
And they, we set up a punk rock night there to where we could go and play punk rock records, and that lasted about a month because there were fights and stuff,
Yeah, that was just amazing because it opened my eyes to the fact that there were other kids there. These were kids I didn't see reaching for those same records I was. There were others there. And that's when we had an inkling that we could possibly do something down there.
I would go to I was in the record bar one day, and next to me, flipping through the stacks, was a kid from junior high who was like the punk rock ne'er-do-well of the high school, who had recited Black Flag's Family Man in English class one day and really freaked everybody out. And so I was a little afraid of him because he was kind of a holy terror, this kid. So we're flipping through the stacks at the record bar, and he's basically telling me, "You need to get that Black Flag record." And I was so terrified of him that I basically bought it out of peer pressure.
I would say the first actual official punk rock show in Corpus Christi was New Year's Eve, 1985 going into 1986, excuse me. I'm old, folks. It was the first thing that was done at the Galvan Ballroom, and it was through the auspices of Bobby Galvan, the son of the owner. Shock was the headliner, and the opening act, was, so to speak, was a de facto band called the Disturbed's Debutantes.
Then there was Shock, and that's where everyone was like, "Oh, Shock's, where it's at and stuff."
Lalo quit, or we might have kicked him out, and or we just decided to form a different band, and we were called Ground Zero. And I don't know, we might have been probably the 400th band called Ground Zero, and in the world.
Then I had, in trying to get an audience together for what was going to become Noise, 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 the fanzine, I had written a Corpus scene report, as it were, for Maximum Rock and Roll that was published in the spring of '86. And one day I'm in the house, actually putting finishing touches on the layout for Noise, 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 and the phone rings. "Hi, is this Tim?" "Yeah." "Hi, my name is Eric Tunison. I'm the drummer for De Kreutzen." Holy shit.
Their music is just totally different, right? I tripped out when I heard it, and when they played, it was just incredible. That's all I remember. It was an incredible show. It was great. One of the first shows.
Yeah, they were touring for that. They were booking the tour. They wanted to play Corpus after reading the scene report. So, yeah, basically I called up Trey Sines and, Philip Harvey and everybody. I said, let's find out how much the Galvans would give us the ballroom for. Let's all chip in a little money, rent the hall. Do you know where we can find a PA, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, it was a great show. I remember it quite well.
And there were like maybe 30 or 40 people that went to the De Kreutzen show.
I loved it. If I remember right, there wasn't a whole bunch of people there.
I'd been trying to form a band called the Hormones that whole time with not a lot of success. We needed an opening act for that night, so Trey got Steve Fish to play bass with me. We found some kid named Tommy Godley to play drums.
And to me, that was a turning point. That was let other bands know it was worth coming here.
It was shocking, and I was very meaning the amount of people there that were into it, and I was shocked by that, and I was happy about that, but I was also kind of sad because our time had come and gone, and we didn't get the adulation, I guess, that those guys were getting. So I was kind of sad about that, but it was also nice to see, like, okay, good, finally, maybe Corpus is catching up.
We opened up for Devastation. Rotting Corpse was also on the bill, and man, it was a solid set. It was a very solid set.
There was a Texas phrase, a buttload of people there. I mean, it started out as it was predominantly a metal crowd, and when we got done, I remember walking off stage out into the crowd, and people were thanking us for coming down, and I was like, "What do you mean coming down?" They said, "Well, you're from Houston." I was like, "No, we're Corpus,
I think Anchor Watt's second show was the Hell Dogs and Salo show. I think there may have been one or two other bands on that bill, but I think that happened in mid-October, and I think the MDC show happened in late October.
I guess it was probably 3 or 4 months later we played basically the same venue again with the same bands, and all of a sudden there were hardcore punks everywhere.
And so the very next show, featuring a national hardcore band, was MDC at the TNT Club. What do you remember about that night?
MDC, Millions of Dead Cop, Millions of Dead Children, Missile Destroyed Civilization. I remember they were late.
Yeah, the MDC show, I remember them being really late. Yeah, I heard they were across the street at a bar watching the World Series or something.
So by that time, in comparison of the DeKreutzen show, I would say MDC was probably twice as big as far as the turnout goes. There was more people at the MDC show, more people that I've never seen or haven't met yet.
Rigor Mortis, Anchor Watt, Salo, and MDC.
Yeah, it was.
And it went way past 2 o'clock in the morning because my mom was waiting up to pick me up because I didn't have a license at the time.
I remember who was there too. I can go on, the list goes on, but that, I would say, nothing against DeKreutzen, but I was more amped up to see MDC.
It was in a little shopping center. The place was small. No business having a club there, much less a punk rock, little club. And yeah, they showed up like about midnight or 1 o'clock. Everybody's parents were pissed off, because their kids were out late, 2 o'clock in the morning. This band, they finally got this band to play, and it was great.
And it was a good show. I mean, the TNT Club was probably about the size of my living room right now, and it was jam-packed with people.
I don't know what I was thinking, but I thought that if you dive off stage, you just wouldn't hurt yourself.
Somebody would catch you?
I was totally wrong. That Dave from MDC pulled me off the floor, and I guess because I think I knocked myself out, really. He was like, "Are you okay, man?" I was like, "Oh."
It wouldn't be the last time, huh?
He was like, "Are you okay?" I was like, guess. He goes, yeah, I pulled you off the floor. People were stepping on your face. I think I bought an issue of AMPM from Richard Koepp and Kenny Harrison for $1. And it was like half of it was handwritten copy.
Oh, yeah.
With the chapa.
We used to put it in Sunrise Mall at a place called the Record Bar, and the manager there was actually pretty cool. I can't remember his name, but he, you know, would bring in punk rock records and stuff, and so we had it there, and I guess Leo, I can't remember his last name, he was the city council member here, or he like got a hold of a copy, you know, and was trying to sue us, and I don't know, it was a big hubbub, you know.
I remember one day Rick Reedus woke me up in the morning, and he came over to my house, and he was, I think, 18, and he said, hey man, I got good news and bad news. Bad news, my girlfriend hates punk rock. She can't believe that I'm trying to get into punk rock, because before that he was in this cover band, and they were a pretty good cover band called Underage. And then he decided to get into punk rock for, you know, about a month, and then said, I'm not doing this crap anymore, but that's the bad news. And then the good news is I got you in the Willies. I talked to Mike Titsworth.
And from then went to the Willies for a while with Chris Chapa, who was Angkor Wat's original drummer. And then I got drafted into Angkor Wat and did that for a couple years, and then said goodbye to thrash.
At some point, I remember, you know, trying to construct that band, or I guess keep that band going with the songs, with the writings of, you know, Chris and Steve Chapa. And I never really got too much into writing until a little bit later.
And it was, you know, at that point when, you know, Danny and Louis and Albert were jamming out with Henry a lot in the barrio in Albolera. I was showing up singing like Slayer lyrics, you know, singing my little pieces. And that's when Henry got signed on to go with Devastation. So Henry goes to Devastation, and me and Albert, you know, we had already befriended all the punks in town, Kingsville, and you name it, all around town. So me and Albert decided to go punk and do our own thing. So that's really how Brutal Poverty started. We got Louis, because Louis and Dan were more metal and rock, and me and Albert were more the punks.
My 10th grade year, in guitar class, I had a couple of metalheads in there wearing DRI shirts, and I was like, I need to hang out with these guys and see, you know, it was a rough school, and it turns out one of them was Brutal Louis Huicho. He played in a band called Brutal Poverty later on, and I was there when they said the name of the band. I would eat lunch with Louis every day, just knowing him from guitar class. So we'd eat lunch, and one day he said, man, you got to come see my band practice. Practice right there on Greenwood. When do y'all practice? He said, every day.
I think we made Brutal Poverty when I was in 10th grade. You got to remember that before we got Dan, we had Tony DeGan, because I went to Carroll High School. So that's when we met Tony DeGan, and I've met with all the punks down there. And I started jamming with Tony, and then Arthur was helping me and Albert out write lyrics, and was actually the first singer. And they went on to form Pure Hate. But for a few months, it was, you know, Tony DeGan, me, Albert, Louis, and Art doing lyrics for a while. And we used to go to Tony's pad and actually jam in his bedroom. I think you probably remembered some of the first times we used to jam. None of us knew what we were doing.
And one day, like, he's like, yeah, we've been jamming. We got our first show. We got a name of our band. I was like, what's the name of it? He's like, Brutal Poverty. And I was like, really? He's like, okay. What did you get a show with? And it was Death Rage and Brutal Poverty. Death Rage was like a metal band, Corpus, that was always going to get signed. And so they're playing at the Boys Club, and I was going to go with Rob Guillen to that show. Missed the show, but Rob bought the demo for Death Rage. Got to listen to that. But Brutal Poverty played, and I remember them playing that specifically. It was so awesome. That was before I was even in any kind of bands. and thinking that was pretty cool that Weecho was playing hardcore music.
I see the day and I want it all today. I see your face and I want it to stay the same. I see their ways and I want them all.
Origin of the band was, it started out as Emanate, which was an all cover band. That was started with Spike, Tom, Dorian, and Jessica Ramirez.
That was a strange scenario because we were not playing punk music, which everybody else was into, and I mean I enjoyed myself, but we were playing more of what was the new alternative music, so stuff like Joy Division, The Smiths, Talk Talk.
And so yeah, that was Emanate, and then I joined the group, and we did a lot of all kinds of 4AD covers and stuff like that, and we decided we were going to do just originals.
There was one day I just said, that's it, we're not playing covers anymore, and the rest of the guys were freaking out, and they're like, what, we can't go not play covers, it's just like being naked on stage. So we did it though. We played one show. It was at I think it was at the Knights of Columbus, and we did an entire set of just original material, and that was a scary thing because I mean, with the punk bands, everybody was doing that. You guys were doing that, but you know, with our style of music, nobody was doing that yet, and it was kind of a weird, unnerving thing.
And so at that time, there weren't very many alternative bands in Corpus. You guys sort of started working pretty quickly with like the hardcore scene. Why did you do that?
Well, I mean, because just they were the bands, the people we knew, you know, and we just wanted to make music. We had other friends who made music, so we got it all together and through our shows at different halls.
Most of I think the more fun shows were the ones at Knights of Columbus. Those were always fun. You know, real good turnout, mix of people that were into the punk scene, and some of the hardcore punk, you know, music listeners that would, you know, kind of really spread their, you know, open their ears, you know, sort of thing, to a different style of music, and we really garnered some fans from that, and some of the more like brutal hardcore, like Brutal Rich. Love Brutal Rich, he's awesome. He really liked us a lot and stuff because of the musical you know, difference and changes and the nuances, I guess, of the stuff we were writing. Our whole point with that band was to basically, it was like having the worst car wreck of your life, but you had fun. And that's what the sound was, just a monstrosity of real, what we consider true industrial music, which is, you know, Neubauten, you know, machines, steel, hammers, and then just these mutated electronics woven in through the whole thing.
You know, Poetic Noise was my introduction to punk music, and it was, you know, like I said, so I just kind of, it was like, all right, I can play in a band and I'll, you know, learn this style of music, and really Mike Alto and Chris Holpold, you know, sort of turned us on to all the old 70s punk, and Sundance too. You know, Sundance was kind of a blues guy, you know, we both were just learning from Mike and Chris about all this old punk, but I immediately liked it.
Pure Hate came together actually with me and Mark Reary. We started the band. It was me and him originally, and then we got Jesse. I think it's Big Jesse, the drummer.
And they were different than a lot of the bands that came out of Corpus, because they kind of had a
Pure Hate.
Pure Hate. Yeah, Pure Hate. Yeah, they were. I mean, they had a hardcore influence, they had a metal influence, so they weren't just like metal or just punk. And no, I thought they were really good. I mean, it's too bad that, you know, they didn't actually record anything, at least not that I know of. Or if they do, I don't have it.
Mark Reery's music was pretty technical, you know, and then so we veered off a little bit, and then we formed off again with James Dosey and Tony Deegan. You know, I can't remember the dates on that. I think I want to say 88,
right?
87, yeah. 88.
You know, they played a couple of times. I remember the Pure Hate show with Anchor Watt at the Galvan Ballroom. That's when I first saw them, and I think we played that show as well. And it was Art, James, Tony, and myself on bass. We played the Valley with Anchor Watt, and I can't remember who else. Might have been Devastation. Raul couldn't make it to the Valley, so I ended up playing bass when he couldn't make that show to the Valley for some reason. I don't know what the reason was, but I learned all the songs in about 6 hours. And Mark Reary had quit the band. I think that's what it was. After that, Art quit and James quit, and then it was just Mark Reary who came back. And then we needed a vocalist, and I moved over to guitar, and we needed a vocalist, and it was Gilbert. So it was Raul Garza, Mark Reary, Tony, Gilbert, Gomez, that's Art's cousin, and myself, right?
So they needed somebody to fill in for Arthur, and I was always at their practices. I pretty much already knew some of the words, so they asked me to fill in. How can I turn that down, you know? So I played about 5 shows with Pure Hate. Yeah, so there was Vane, Stand Hard, The Flag We Know.
One of the next shows that I went to was I went to go see the Crayons play. But like, not counting, you know, the Anchor Watch shows and all those metal shows. But,
which
you know,
Crayon show was that?
At that hall, y'all did a bunch of covers.
Right.
And that's the first time I saw Raul Garza playing the bass. And then
Knights of Columbus.
Then I fell in love with Raul Garza, but he doesn't know it.
And so when we first started out, most of our music was straight crossover. It was really fast. Raul wrote most of the first 7 or 8 tunes that we had, and then we added a bunch of covers, you know, Corrosion, DRI, that sort of thing. And we did our first show in 1987 at the Knights of Columbus Hall on Alameda.
Honestly, you know, I never thought too much about the fact that we were the only ones doing it. It was all very new to me, but everybody would be like, "Yeah, man, y'all are playing old punk," and I was just like, oh, "Okay." And then I slowly started to learn that there were all these newer, like, thrash, and thrashcore and just very much more progressive, faster, harder bands that were out there, and I started to see the difference. And then when we would play shows, I would hear the differences in our music. It was, so a lot of it was actually playing the shows that, cued me in on the fact that there were all these different facets of what we were doing and not just old punk.
The next big show that we did was with Desperate Minds from Canada, and that was the first time we'd ever met anybody from another band outside of our city, and that was quite an experience. Those guys were really nice and friendly, and made sure to say nice things about us. And this is not what we were expecting. Hardcore punk, from what we'd read, was just this really cynical, sarcastic, jaded world. And these guys were actually very inspirational and full of that positive energy that, it's just kind of new to us. So
we played like a party in Chapman Ranch, and it fucking was badass. It was like a little pit and everything. Anyways, we fucking played with Desperate Minds, and it was just a terrible show.
Oh, I remember that.
Because Mike had stage fright, and he decided to bail out at the last minute.
Eifling?
No, Mendoza. So I had to get Kato. Kato learned the songs like in one day. They weren't hard at all, dude. They were just...
I was just impressed that they were from Canada, and we were having a Canadian band play down here, and so that they were making that big old journey, which kind of, I understand how that was, because we ended up doing that same type of journey 6 years later or 5 years later.
We supported all kinds of stuff. A lot of times we headlined because a lot of bands didn't want to follow us. But like CBS, FIFH, San Antonio bands like that, Rotting Corpse from Dallas, Devastation. We got lucky. We actually got to play in front of open up for GBH, which were gods as far as I was concerned at the time.
I mean, they really took metal and hardcore and put them together in my kind of favorite mix. I was a big fan of The Accused, and they were right along that same vein. And Dave Brinkman was just such a great guy. We lived in the same neighborhood. Me and my pals would go over there and hang out in the park and be up to no fucking good. And we saw him one day. He lived right next door. And anyway, we saw him, and me and a friend of mine, Tim, who started a band Aggravated Assault back in the day, went over and knocked on his door and said, "Hey, do you have a band called Anchor Watt?" And we knew it was him. Nobody could mistake Dave Brinkman. The guy's about 6 foot tall, had a mohawk, and was a built guy. So, I mean, we couldn't mistake him for anybody else. And he was just totally cool. He said, "Yeah, man, that's my band. Come on in."
Woo! Hot in here. Very hot in
Yeah, Unified Society was started by me and Aaron Gonzalez, who lives in New Jersey, I found out, and actually Titsworth helped us out too somewhat. I mean, I wasn't in a band, so I wanted to do as much as I could to help expose some of the Corpus bands And I mean, I pretty much did it all by myself. Like I said, and then Aaron Gonzalez helped me like with the first issue, but after that it was just me. And then I had some, some contributions by like Richard and whoever else wanted to contribute stuff.
Or was that just a way to tell people where the shows were going to be, or give them information about what to do? Or what?
Yeah, it was just I wanted to give exposure to the local bands. I don't know how much exposure I actually gave them because I'd only made like 25 copies or 30 copies each issue.
We started doing the band. It was David Brinkman on vocals, Mike Trevino on bass, and me on guitar. Well, because about that time, Anchor Wild was starting to pretty much get going. I think they got signed to a Metal Blade at that time. So the David Brinkman thing was always kind of like, he would sing one song with us. I think one song, Armchair Mercenaries. He wrote that one. But once we started getting going, I guess that's when really my singer-songwriter, or whatever you want to call it, came out, and I started writing songs, and we started just practicing songs. Mike had some songs, and before you know it, we were playing shows.
How it came about, I know Dosey was asking me if I wanted to sing. He wanted to start another band because he wanted to play guitar, he wanted to play different kind of music, kind of like 7-second-ish side, not so hardcore, you know what I mean, maybe a little bit more melodic. And then he knew Sundance and Rex, I guess, from Poetic Noise, and he asked if they wanted to play, because I guess Poetic Noise had kind of disbanded a little bit.
Verbal Assault, the most impressive thing about Verbal Assault that I remember is when they started off playing, they were on their opening song, and I was sitting on the side of the stage, and I was watching, the drummer and the singer started holding out his long yell, and while he was in the process of yelling, he ran and jumped on the bass drum of the drummer, and that bass drum just literally almost went halfway down, and he just did a humongous leap off onto the stage, and I was like, oh my God, that was such an amazing leap, and I'm surprised that drum set held together after that,
Yeah, but you'd come out of those shows and you'd be so charged up, there was just no sleeping that night. You'd come home and you'd just be so jacked to the moon by all the great energy you got from these shows. I would just come home and, having bought all the cassettes from every band that was there, and I would just go home and listen to them,
One thing that I thought was super cool that I always remember was after every one of those shows back in the day, they had a band member from each band sit at a table and they divided the money equally. And I thought that was super cool because it was all about, camaraderie, everybody being, on that same level. I thought that was really cool.
Some of these kids didn't have any money. I could tell they would come in there. I saw kids with bags of pennies and dimes, and I'm like, oh man. How much is in there, did you say?
We were already doing some demo recordings that we were passing around, and so we started looking for a studio, and that came together in 1989. We found a place called Apple Crate Studios, which was actually on the same street where my brother Roger and I grew up, Westgard Lane, and that's over by Ray High School.
I want to say senior year in high school, and after that's when Basic Language started. That's when I ran into, I met Grant and Corey and Andy, because Andy was playing in the Insaniacs at the time, and Corey used to hang out. I think he even lived with for a while with Mike Eifling.
So they came over one day, and me and Dosey had written a couple songs, and so we showed, just real basic, real fast, 3-chord, punk rock songs, hardcore songs, and, they picked it up, and right when we played those 2 songs, we were like, oh yeah, you know what I mean? And so I think we wrote like 10 songs, and then went and played with, I guess it was with the Crayons maybe, down in Harlingen.
Right.
Or McAllen, we played in McAllen, and I guess Fang was supposed to show up, and they never showed up.
Joywax sounds was definitely a breakaway from the 70s punk music that Poetic Noise was doing, for sure. And it was, and again, it was something that wasn't, for me, it was just, I just, you know, responded to what was being written. And then Kenny was very much coming from a very rap kind of angle. You know, Tone Loc was big back then, and Beastie Boys were just young and starting out, and Kenny was really putting that angle on top of this, you know, 7 seconds kind of vibe, and so it just was this very high energy, very fast, very melodic, just lots of fun.
After that, we just kind of kept playing with y'all, you know what I mean? For some reason, we had a symbiotic relationship with y'all, you know what I mean? A love-hate relationship where we play with y'all, you know what I mean?
There weren't that many bands in town.
Yeah,
too.
there weren't,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like we always played with y'all, you know? And even when we were from the Soul, it seems like we'd always play with, you know, the Crayons, the same bands, you know, until the bands from San Antonio started coming down, and then it was kind of, that's when the scene started getting real crazy and lots of fights.
When I met like people like Adrian Gutierrez, who hung out with other guys like, what was it, Renee Signs, I think, and some other cats, I can't remember their name, but those guys were really into it. Adrian was really into it. I remember Adrian would talk about it as like the punk rock movement kind of thing, and hardcore, and to me, I was like, you know, wow, you know, like that was like, you know, heavy to me. Like I was like, you know, I want to be a part of this kind of thing.
When I started getting into aggressive music, I started getting more and more into hardcore punk rock, and I hated the SODs and the MODs and the Anthraxes that would like make use of the mosh or the, you know what I mean? They cocked it out, and I couldn't. I hated that. So later on, when we were doing hardcore, we kind of razzed on bands, but not the way those bands like razzed on punk rockers in general. We weren't razzing on punk rockers, we were razzing on everybody, and it was just fast punk rock hardcore stuff. Met a lot of good guys, played with the Vomit Spots and No Fraud.
Hosting the show is my friend, and soon to be your friend, Ranger!
Hi there. It's come to our attention that some of our faithful followers prefer their music a little heavier, a little faster, a little louder. Well, after many hours of painstaking research, we scoured the countryside looking for just such a band, and we think we found them. They call themselves Sufferance. They're Corpus Christi's own. Get ready for an unusual experience.
So in 1990, I talked to the guy at Wild Rags, and I asked him, I said, you know, we need to change our name. I want to change our name before we put out an album. And he said, okay, change your name and tell me what it is. We recorded a 2-song demo, and we went by the name of Suffering. I think he made 500 copies or 1,000, and actually that was the last deal we ever made with Wild Rags. We kind of went our own way, and in 1990, Sufferance started, and you know, it went from different member changes until probably, I want to say, maybe 94, 93, 94 is where we actually found the core of the band that lasted until I actually left, and they still kept on going, which was in maybe 97 or something like that. I ended up leaving the band.
Yeah, we did the first one, Violent Termination, self-financed. We did all that ourselves. The second album was called Signs of Life. We recorded that in Dallas. You know, it's a little fast and just out of control, and maybe the songs aren't perfect. The production's a little on the weak side per se, but it is what it is. It was our next step as a band, and then
This is called Idolatry.
third album was Idolatry. We recorded that in Morris Sound Studios in Tampa, Florida with Scott Burns, which was at the time where all the big metal bands were going, and Sepultura and Death, and that was definitely the pinnacle with Idolatry. It just, like, you know, we wrote really good songs and we played them really well, and it just, you know, that was metal, thrash metal, I think, the way it was meant to be, you know.
Stone Groove came around, and I was starting to get the hang of being the singer, and right about that time, that's when you know, Pantera was breaking, and Rage Against the Machine, and Tool, and all these kind of up and coming bands, and that just drove me harder to be balls out, you know, as hard as I could be. So I had that, plus we played with a lot of punk rock bands. We played with the wrong crowd. We played with the Crayons a few times, you know, and most of our shows were with like punk bands, and so it got me really into being heavy, you know, being as heavy as it could be, but still kind of doing that agnostic front thing where you kind of cross over with, you know, the punks. You know, there's punks and skinheads, and there's long hairs out there too, you know. And it was really cool. So we did a few shows in Austin. Most of our stuff was here in Corpus, though. We did a small tour with Sufferance, and we went from here to Lubbock, Colorado Springs, and back, and that was cool.
You started out as a thrash band, more that kind of scene, but it was a little bit more musical in the sense that one of our guitar players wanted to incorporate more melody in it. which I didn't think we fit in with a lot of the bands at the time, but we got asked by a lot of good bands to play with them after we started getting our name out there. You know, there were bands like there was Apparition was one of the bands that branched off from Devastation. We played, you know, mostly in town. I think the only place we played out of town was one show in Ingleside. We never really traveled, but we played, you know, EJs, Uncle Stories, Zeros. We played pretty much everywhere you could think of in town. The Center. We opened up for Suicidal Tendencies one time. I think that was like the big one.
At Sufferance, we opened up for like Marilyn Manson, Clutch. We also did like 5 Milwaukee Metal Fest, which if you don't know what Milwaukee Metal Fest is, back then in the 90s, it was a huge 3-day festival that probably had 120 bands, and it was usually held at the Eagles Auditorium in Milwaukee.
91, our booking agent couldn't get us on the opening slot for anybody. It just wasn't a lot going on. Tours were canceling left and right, so he said, "Do you want to go out on your own?" And we're like, "If that's what it takes, we will." We didn't really want to because our name wasn't that big, but you know, we did. And so he put us headlining a tour with Malevolent Creation and a Demolition Hammer. And that tour was like, man, 87 or 88 shows in about 95 days. We barely had any days off of.
We would take off. Now this band, Sufferance, would take off like on tours for a month. We would book our own tour, or this guy Sean would put together an itinerary of, you know, where we would go and play, and we would go off for a month. We would go off for 2 weeks.
I mean, we played a Japanese restaurant in Oklahoma City, and we played just some BFE places in the middle of nowhere, but it was great. You know, we did a few shows in Mexico too on that tour, but that ended up being the last of Devastation. Our last show ever was sometime in August, early August of 1991 at Joe's Garage in Dallas. I mean, we walked off the stage and it was the end of the band.
So yeah, 88, 89, I started kind of coinciding with starting high school, started seeing punks, and a lot of my friends started getting into punk, and you know, I'd see people wearing Gnostic Front shirts or Crumbsucker shirts or whatever it would be, you know, Cryptic Slaughter, Slayer, of course.
When 2 Minute Warning broke up, everybody just kind of went their own ways. That was 89. I was in 9th grade. I was a freshman, and so that lasted a little while.
I'm assuming, like most people around here, I guess metal was sort of the gateway drug into punk. So yeah, 89 was the first year I actually was kind of, I would say, old enough to be allowed out of the house, and you know, given a whatever 11 or 12 o'clock curfew, which was just fine for going to shows at like Stardust, because those shows would end at 11 anyway.
My first Stardust show was a DRI show, you know, and I was so excited to be, you know, let out of the house to be able to go, and we went, and I think I had my red Doc Martens on, you know, and I wasn't even, I probably thought, you know, I could get away with that stuff in Cal Island, but I didn't know if I could get away with that here in town. You know, things are different. And the first thing I remember seeing is 4 or 5 like white power skinheads, like Zeke Heiling on the back of a car, and someone taking a picture, and I was like, that's going down here? Like, people can do that here, you know?
A lot of people didn't know a lot of these bands, and then there was a lot of violence also happening at these shows. A lot of skinheads, San Antonio skins coming into Corpus, and Corpus guys wanted to be skinheads, and a lot of violence started happening at a lot of the shows. So I think that's why a lot of there wasn't big turnouts. I mean, me mainly, I think it had a lot to do with nobody knowing who's playing. I never heard of these guys, and there's not a lot of people out there that just like to just go out and check it out.
you know, I went there and I sat down. I think I had a Minor Threat shirt on or something, and some guy came up to me and he asked me, "What size are your boots?" And I was like, "Really? This is gonna happen right now?" You know, I'm just a kid, you know, and I didn't know what to say. I'm not a fighter then, you know, and so I just looked at him and I said, "My size?" And I was like, "This is either gonna go one or two ways, you know." And he said, "Are you gonna fight for him?" And I probably didn't really want to, you know, but I just said, "Yeah." And "Oh, hey, you're cool," you know. And it's like, all right, you know, everything was cool then, you know. But I remember being that feeling of like, you don't know what can happen.
At some point, people started doing shows at a small pizza parlor over on Norton Street by Delmar College called E&J's Pizza.
I remember we played for Anti-Schism, which like who came to town one day, and I don't think anybody realized like they were coming or something. I think they just showed up and nothing was really set, so we actually played like for them, and like, you know, maybe some other people like, you know, you and probably Mitty and Raul, and that might have been it. But that was awesome. I think we played with maybe The Big Thing and Starvation Army. I don't remember if we actually played, but that was awesome.
We played a lot when we were from the Soul, because we would play our own shows with y'all, and then we would go play like high school parties and other places. You know, people would ask us to go play, because we played a lot of covers, you know, or kind of alternate cover original band, you know what I mean? So we did that for a couple years, and then Dosey figured we weren't going to become rock stars or something, you know, or, you know, he was going to go to college anyway, so he decided to go to college, so he kind of left, and then that was the end of From the Soul.
Yeah, like... What was your first show? Do you remember?
It was an archive show. It was at E&J's on Norton.
Okay.
And shit, I think I was down for spring break or something. I know I lived in Oklahoma at the time. But then the first show that was like y'all seen was a Fish Eyes and Flowers show.
So when we were doing Basic Language, we did a lot of covers and stuff, but we were writing kind of our own material, and I think we recorded like a 5-song demo. I remember the one song that people liked and at the same time disliked was Old Glory. Because it was funny, because I know that Corey was a big fan of it, but it was a great song, great riff and stuff, and it was about the time when flag burning was big, and that was my first foray into writing, and my being facetious or sarcastic didn't exactly come across that way, so it seemed like a champion of like, don't burn the flag, like when I was really saying it's not that big of a deal.
And I think we're still broken up, but we still all like, maybe we still hung out, we still went to shows, all of us, and me and Hell loved Big Mouth, man. That was like, at one point, that was like our favorite band.
And the Neurosis thing came about, it was us, Neurosis, and Vampire Lesbos. I don't know where they were from.
I still see that flyer.
But they practiced in Raul's house, and they watched us practice. We told them, hey, you can practice. We got to practice also because it's for the show. And they were like, yeah, no problem. And they were, they watched us play, and they were like, man, there's no way that you guys can open for us. Y'all are a lot better. We were like,
But I'd probably heard Neurosis once or twice. I didn't give a damn about them. I could care less. I didn't know shit about them. And went to the show because everyone was like, it's Neurosis, Neurosis. Okay, let's go see Neurosis. And fucking blew my mind watching these fucking guys up there just fucking going at it with so much fucking emotion. I think it really had an effect on all of us, on all of Community Crisis. We were just like, whoa. Like, what the hell what were we doing? You know what I mean? Like, what were we doing? Like, we weren't taking, like, this thing serious enough.
Nimbus did one full album recording, and we did, I think, a demo of, like, 3 songs. And the first time was, like, in I think it was, like, an 8-track studio or something like that. And then the second time we recorded, which was the full album, the cassette that was Utopian Eyes, was in I think a 16-track. It was, and this was all analog, of course, back then. And we actually don't have the master for the album, the multi-track master, because the dude recorded over it.
Oh, the original 617 started back in late 91? Yeah, it was 90, dude. It was 1990, it's pop punk. We got to play with a lot of good bands, some popular bands like Green Day and 15.
This poor guy, I don't know what he was thinking, man. Like, put all these bands, and it wasn't just bands from Corpus, but he had like bands from, I think, like Houston maybe and other parts of Texas. And he put everybody like on the same floor of the Howard Johnston, whatever. And the place got trashed, man. I don't know what he was thinking. I thought it was incredible. Some guy was going to send us a bus down to pick us up at your house, actually. And it was great seeing, all these crazy people pull up to your house, like one at a time, and show up. And it seemed, and not to mention all the the non-band people who just like going with. That was awesome.
Ruben, tell me about the Jawbreaker show.
Oh yeah, the Jawbreaker. That's what started it, kind of. That was kind of what started the whole thing. 80 Proof, which was Kelly Moore, Sweet Daddy, and Rob Satan from Community Christ, and who else is in that band? Oh, Little Ricky, and Pretty Boy Adrian, which they were in a band. And they weren't, doing so well with their singer at the time. And they asked me if I wanted to try out to sing. They knew I liked the Descendants and stuff. And they were going to play that show at the house, thanks to Richard, which Jawbreaker played. And that just kind of spawned everything for me to get in the groove of jamming out, doing a band.
Jawbreaker was supposed to play, I think it was for the Unfun tour. And something happened, and Philip Kelso and I were moving to San Marcos the next day. And all of a sudden, we're all hanging out at Ruben's house going, where's the show going to happen? And then the band shows up, and they did this amazing show at Ruben's house, whose parents, I guess, were out of town conveniently. And and they played in basically the dining room, and I just remember the bassist, I think Chris was the guy that was closest to the fridge and the cooler, so in between songs he was handing out beers to people, and this was done all in candlelight.
How many people were there at your show?
Oh man, there was, at that show, at the Jawbreaker show, there was at least, 30 people inside my house? And
More than that, dude.
and a shitload of bush can pyramids. It was empty beer. Empty bush can pyramids. Never forget that.
We were pretty busy over at the pizza place, booking gigs and stuff. But then things happened. There was another violent episode, and then I guess the business was struggling to make ends meet, and eventually they decided to close their doors. So we were stranded. We were left stranded without a working venue, and we still had some cool shows that we wanted to have that summer. We had Jawbreaker lined up, and we had Christ on a Crutch.
You know, you don't go to hotels when you're a DIY fucking stinking punk band going across America. You stay in a parking lot or at someone's house.
But for a while there, that's all we could have. You know, were just these house shows. But you know, even though it was pretty slow in those days, we would have just maybe one show a month, or at most 2 shows a month. People still turned out, you know, even if it was just a handful of people. And so it never really did die. It just became a little more selective in terms of the crowd, in terms of, you know, who was still listening to the music and everything.
All right, Disco Kickers, man, do we have to talk about this? Disco Kickers actually was created as a joke entirely. It was never supposed to be anything that was beyond writing some really bad dance music schlock crap. And in fact, I came up with the name Disco Kickers because I took the 2 types of music that I hated the most, which is disco and country, and slammed them together. It was like Disco Kickers. There you go.
And I remember dressing them up. And what I mean by dressing them up was they dressed like girls. And they borrowed pretty much my clothes. It was Marnie's clothes, Lana's clothes, and mine. We gave Chris Laurel cute little ponytails, and Nathan wore my leggings with some. I gave him some of my lipstick. He looked really pretty.
I started in high school so early. I was hanging out with Jesse Sachs a lot, and so subsequently I was at Ron Crowd practices all the time, and it just seemed like fun, you know. And I thought I could do this, and so I started asking around who has equipment, who has this and that, you know. And so I was in a class with Adam, and then we got together with Jesse and kind of duped him into being in the band. We're like, hey, we got this party to play, and you've got equipment, so let's write some songs and we'll play this party.
I think we started working on that in, was it 88? We did 3 songs one year, and then we did 3 more songs the next year, and then we finally, that was the first release on the TFC Records label that I started, and we put out our first 7-inch. We ended up putting 4 songs on that 7-inch, but it did take about 2 years to put that, to get that done, and to get that our first release done. But that started everything for us, for the Crayons both, and for the record label. Then shortly after that, we started released our next release, which was, I think, the Crayons tape.
It was me and Todd, Pete, Pete Skidmore, Henry, and then Bill Kirkendall. And we did Happy Meal, and we were, but by that time we were kind of swept up in a lot of the pop punk Berkeley stuff, Crimp Shrine, Green Day, and all that stuff.
When me and Nathan and Chris Garcia got back together to jam again, it was with more of a pop punk band. We called ourselves Sweet Daddy, and we got a chance to play a lot of good shows. At that point, the scene was changing in Corpus. It was more venues coming out, more or less, and the hall and venue situation was spreading out. The guys that were still booking hall shows were having a hard time getting guys to go to the hall, and the venue guys were having a hard time getting as much people as they wanted to go in their venue. But eventually it broke off and there was no more hall, and it was all venue.
And then that, I think we played 1 or 2 shows, and then that fizzled for a second, and then re-fizzled back up to Slugbug.
With Ray?
Well, it's a 3-piece, yeah, with Ray and me and Todd.
So skipping forward a bit, there's Bayfest. Get back to Bayfest. So the ladies from the Bayfest committee bring us on. We do our first show at Bayfest. We do a show at Bayfest. We get off the stage and everything was cool. They asked us back. So this time we really planned out what we were doing with regards to making sure they will never ask us back.
So Craig would be banging on a steel drum with a crowbar, and at one point he came up, Craig McGonigal, and put a gas mask on me, and I was smoking a cigarette, so I was pissed off. I took it out. Well, right then he broke a TV next to me, and all this gas came out, and I was like, oh shit, So actually they wound up having to make a recording of that show because they did $1,500 of damage to the stage, so they had to sell tapes of that show.
So out of that, they sent us a letter saying that we owed them money for destroying the stage, that we were never allowed to play Bayfest again, and that the city actually banned us for ever performing at a public function ever within the city limits.
Jesse Sachs started playing for the Wrong Crowd, and a band, he kind of jumped in for as a replacement for the bass player. I think his name was Santos, for a band called Uranus Punk. So Jesse did that, and I started kind of hanging out with people who were in a band called Dry Heave at the time.
Just jammed out, like I said. We started at the American Legion Hall and whatnot, and then I think Casey Hall, and around that time, Molina Daycare Center, we wanted to do something at Molina Daycare Center, so we just, once again, just got together with the bands, we wanted to jam and put some stuff together, and it was the Molina Daycare Center.
Dry Heave's guitar player, John Beers, quit like shortly after Curtis left the band. So they got Dave Cardona, who was in the Madcaps. He was a guitar player, and they got him to play guitar, and they asked me to play drums. And we had about a week to learn their songs, which wasn't that hard really, but.
Andrew Gonzalez was a student at Baker, and I remember meeting him and becoming friends, and so he was one of the people that when I met him I was kind of like I don't know, just kind of like inspired, you know, and exposed to like a different strain of music than like the Nimbus scene, you know. It's a little a lot edgier, I guess.
We got in with Bobby at Drop-In, and that was like this huge blessing. He opened the gate for us because there was nothing going on. Well, we didn't know anybody else, you know, so we happened upon the bar that was in our neighborhood, and so we asked him, could we play here? He was like, yeah, we do concerts, and so we were like, cool, then we want to do a show, and I believe the first show we did at Drop-In was Loser, Festus, and Dry Heave, I think the Dry Heaves, yeah, it was Festus, Loser, and the Dry Heaves. Oh, and I believe Ron Crowd was there, and naturally a brawl broke out.
You make me sad!
Joseph Dominguez on vocals, Jessica Starena on drums, Arthur Perez on guitar, and myself on bass.
Yeah, I guess after Unified Society, everybody moved up to Austin. You know, I carried the torch. Chris Perrier and I guess, pretty much carried the torch, bringing small acts. Actually, I guess I have always been one of the guys that ventured out of the punk rock thing. I always, you know, like I said, Joint Chiefs, a funk band. I think we tried to get Cousin Spooky down here. If we didn't, they probably did it themselves. I'm not sure. But Gals Panic Ska was picking up too, so we started doing ska shows.
We had a bunch of songs. We lived at the building on John Sartain, along with Festus and I think the Wrong Crowd and whoever else was living there. We recorded a live demo at E&J's, or Backdrafts, or whatever it's called. Do you remember what it's called?
I think it was Backdrafts.
Backdrafts. Yeah, we recorded a live demo. The music was all live, and then we did the vocals in a closet at the building. And it came out pretty neat. It has a neat sound to it, you know, like one take kind of stuff.
Jesse Gomez really was the one who started having regular shows around town. Zero started booking bands. They you know, allowed us to play there a couple times. Festus played there. Childman played there. Big Mouth played there a lot. Big Mouth was our brother band. Basically featured Kato from the Crayons, Pete Suarez, Tony DeGon, Raul Garza, who started in the Crayons with us, and so they were phenomenal. They were really energetic, super tight, and just a great band to watch.
How can that be love when there's so much hate? And how can anyone think straight? How can anyone live in peace when someone else can choose your fate? Facing circles in my mind, it is all a waste of time. To confuse and keep up with this world and figure out why it's all so hard. Just doesn't make sense to me. What is this life that I'm supposed to see? Just doesn't make sense to me. What is this life that I'm supposed to see?
Touring for Brutal Poverty, we didn't do a whole lot of it because we didn't know how. In the early days, like when we got that show with DI down in the valley, you know, I couldn't even tell you how we got it. We just got in contact with some guy and we ended up playing there. We played a couple of times in San Antonio. We played at the DMZ a few times. Like I said, we played down in the valley. We played up in Houston one time. We actually went to Mexico once for a one-off gig in Nuevo Laredo, which was totally insane. Though, yeah, we had to walk across the border with our guitars and stuff. They had a drum set it was like in the back of somebody's house where they sold beer. It was totally crazy insane.
I believe in when you take the stage, take the fucking stage, you know? And a lot of guys, because we knew we weren't the best musicians around, obviously. You know, there's so many great guys in this town. But we knew that if we could just be exciting live, then we could get an edge, and I think that's kind of what did it for us.
We also started getting like Larry from Childman would get us shows in Houston, and God, we get the worst. They'd get us the worst shows, like, you know, 3 people show up, kind of like at some big heavy metal venue, you know, and I remember we play also in Austin. I think maybe you guys got us a show at the Cavity Club, and they told us to wheel our crap into one of this dark room, and we're like, you know, hey, there's no lights in here. And the guy was like, you know, yeah, the lights got smashed out. We'll try and get light bulbs in there, but for now, just put your stuff in there and don't touch the walls. And we're like, no, what are you talking about? Don't touch the walls. Okay, well, Gigi Allen played here last week and smeared shit on the walls or something.
Did you go to the Green Day show with
the legendary Green Day show?
What do you remember?
I remember that there's more people who say that they were at that show than were actually at that show. That's what I remember about that show.
And at that point, it was 1993, we're still doing hall shows. We actually played a show with Green Day on their way up to Hall of Fame status, where they're going to do now. And they were just 3 kids cruising around. And they came, stayed at our place, and they were like, we're talking to them, hanging out. And like, man, they're all courting us from all these record labels. So-and-so gave us a drum set. I said, oh, really? You're not going to sign with them? I said, no. We're going to keep the drum set, though.
I liked the project from the jump because it was full on, DIY, and it brought a sense of like this communal strength, because everybody was in it for the same goal, get us on the map, and not us as like bands, but us as a city. I don't know. I just like the whole idea of doing it on our own. We didn't ask anybody for anything. We got it. Everybody did their part, and it made for a good little project.
Danny Lohner went on to get a lot of success later on by being a member of Nine Inch Nails and doing his thing with members of Perfect Circle and doing movie soundtracks. Really another great inspiration to the metal scene as well as any musician here in town, because Danny was a really great guy. He had a real vision for music, and he was just a lover of music and made it his life, and really showed everybody around here that you can get out of Corpus and make a living out of this thing if you're willing to commit to it and do what it takes to move forward with the life, even if you're going to make some sacrifices.
Yeah, so we played with Sweet Daddy, who were certainly a lot more pop than we were. As always, we were the ever raunchy Hormones. I was advising kids, to, go start their own band now. If I could do it, they could too.
Corpus, of course, will always be my home, and it helped me to develop, I think, the whole idea that it was so small, and we had such a diverse music scene. I mean, you had the metalhead, but then, this punk rock scene came up, and then all these other bands started coming up, and you had bands like Nimbus, which are like, where are these guys coming from? Abby Somebody, things of that nature that came out of all that too. And it was like, not in Houston, where I'm from now, it would be like, what do you want to put these bands with bands sounded like? Back then, it was like everybody just played together. There was no, we can't have Nimbus play with DMZ or the Crayons play with the Chromax, which they did, which was kind of funny. That was still things that would happen in Corpus, because there was an idea of like, only these bands could come play together.
It's so cool to hang out with people that are, want to make a name for their band, and they're trying to get up there, trying to rise above, and just all seeing my daughters with me with this punk music, and I just never want to stop. I always want to keep going, and now I have 2 grandsons, and I'm hoping maybe I'll go with them. They're 5 and 6, so it'll be a while, but I'm still gonna be there.
When I was like 14, I didn't know who the hell anything was coming out of the 60s. Any kid can just, you know, they have access to like what happened in the 60s musically here in Corpus. It's like I didn't find out about Zachary Thax until I was like in my 20s. And like any kid who's 14 now, you know, I had to go to Camelot to find like an MDC tape that was like 5 years old.
So in a way, Corpus, you know, is a unique, interesting place and an unlikely place to have had this like burgeoning punk rock scene. But in a way, it was really American what was going on. And one of the things I've always been fascinated about that, for that reason, is the fact that there was a large Hispanic part of the scene. It was almost like a kind of Americanizing process, I feel like, you know what I mean? It was almost like it made you American to be punk rock. It just brushed away your, whatever your former identity was, and it made it this thing, this punk rock thing. So everybody feels like they're a part of something. And all those people that were involved in it couldn't feel a part of what was going on in the mainstream, for whatever reason. And that makes it really kind of pure and great.